Iron beasts of the Somme, the dawn of mechanized warfare. On the mist-laden morning of September 15th, 1916, the battlefield near the villages of Flers and Courcelette was quiet in the moments before dawn. The soldiers on both sides were weary, their bodies numb from weeks of unrelenting combat in the Somme Offensive. The ground, once fertile farmland, had been pulverized into a nightmarish expanse of mud, craters, and barbed wire. What had once been fields of crops and meadows were now wastelands littered with broken bodies, shattered trees, and the debris of war. But this day was different. Unknown to the German defenders, the British were preparing to unleash a weapon that would forever change warfare. As the first rays of sunlight struggled to pierce the smoke and mist, a low, metallic grinding began to echo across the battlefield. It wasn't the sound of artillery or the rumble of infantry boots, but something new, something monstrous. The soldiers in the German trenches peered over the parapets, their rifles at the ready, expecting another infantry assault or perhaps another artillery barrage. But what they saw instead shook them to their core. From the British lines emerged the Mark I tank, a slow, hulking beast of iron and steel, its caterpillar tracks chewing up the mud as it advanced. The ground trembled beneath its weight as it crawled toward the German trenches. The British soldiers, many of whom had never seen the tank in action themselves, watched in awe. The infantry, whose lives had been defined by the relentless carnage of trench warfare, now had something that seemed to offer hope, an ironclad protector that could lead them forward, breaking the stalemate that had claimed so many of their comrades. Private William Richards, a British infantryman in the New Zealand Division, would later recall that day with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. When I first saw the tank, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was like something out of a nightmare, a giant metal beast that growled as it moved. We followed behind it, amazed but also terrified. If this thing worked, it would change everything. But God, it was slow, so slow. You could see the Germans, at first confused, and then, as the tank got closer, you could see the fear in their faces. They had no idea what to do. The Mark I tanks were slow, cumbersome machines, trundling across the battlefield at just 4 miles per hour. They belched smoke and roared like a wounded animal as they struggled through the mud, their heavy tracks often slipping and sinking into the quagmire. Many of the tanks broke down before they even reached the front lines. In total, only 32 of the 49 tanks deployed made it into action that day, with the rest falling victim to mechanical failures, getting stuck in shell craters, or simply overheating. One of the tank drivers, Sergeant Harold Green, recalled the terror inside the tank. Inside the beast, it was chaos. The noise was deafening, gears grinding, metal clanking, and the engine roaring in your ears. The heat was unbearable. The fumes made us choke, and the tank rocked and shuddered with every bump. I could hardly see through the narrow slit in front of me, but I knew we had to keep moving. Every minute felt like an hour, but we pressed on, knowing the infantry were counting on us. As the tanks lumbered forward, their crews fought not only the Germans but also the machines themselves. Inside the tanks, it was a claustrophobic hell. The air was thick with oil fumes, and the temperature inside the steel hull soared. Communication was nearly impossible over the deafening noise of the engine, and visibility was limited to narrow slits cut into the tank's armor. Yet, despite the hardships, the crews persevered, knowing they were making history. For the German soldiers, the sight of the tanks was nothing short of horrifying. Accustomed to fighting men with rifles, bayonets, and artillery, they now faced an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Machine gun fire bounced harmlessly off the tank's thick armor. Rifle shots were futile. Panic spread through the German lines as the tanks approached. Corporal Hans Muller, a German soldier, later described the scene. "We saw this thing, this monster, coming toward us. It was unlike anything we had ever seen. We fired our rifles at it, but the bullets just bounced off. The noise it made, a grinding, terrible noise, and it kept coming. We were terrified. Some of the men ran, others froze in place. It felt like the end of the world." The Mark I tanks, though far from perfect, managed to punch through the German lines at several points. Their primary weapons, Two 6-pounder naval guns mounted on either side blasted apart machine gun nests and pillboxes. The sight of the tanks crushing barbed wire and rolling over enemy trenches was enough to break the morale of many German soldiers. Lieutenant Kurt Weiss, another German officer, recalled how the tanks turned the tide. It was chaos. Our defenses had been strong for weeks, but these machines, they broke through. The men didn't know how to fight them. We had no weapons that could stop them. Some of the men tried to throw grenades, but they were too slow. I watched one tank roll over a machine gun nest like it was nothing. We were helpless. Despite the terror they inspired, the tanks were far from invincible. Many became bogged down in the mud or broke down due to mechanical failures. One tank, stuck in a shell crater, was abandoned by its crew, who had to flee under fire. Another was hit by German artillery and exploded in a ball of fire, leaving only twisted metal behind. Yet, even with these setbacks, the tanks had proven their worth. They had not won the battle on their own, but they had paved the way for the infantry to advance and had shown that the future of warfare would be mechanized. For the infantrymen who followed the tanks, the experience was both exhilarating and terrifying. The sight of the tanks rolling forward gave them hope, but the battlefield was still a deadly place. Private James Wallace, a British soldier, remembered the aftermath of the attack. We advanced behind the tanks, hoping they would protect us, but the Germans were still there, still fighting. We lost so many men that day, friends I had known since the beginning of the war. But when I saw that tank crush through the enemy defenses, I knew things were changing. This was the future. By the end of the day, the Battle of Flers and Courcelette had resulted in a modest gain for the British. The villages of Flers and Courcelette were captured, and the German lines had been breached in several places. The tanks, despite their flaws, had achieved their mission. They had shocked the enemy, broken through defenses, and given the British a glimpse of what mechanized warfare could achieve. The psychological impact of the tanks was profound. Though the German forces would soon adapt and develop new tactics to combat them, the Mark I had changed the nature of warfare forever. As both sides reflected on the day's events, the tanks became a symbol of the brutal efficiency that modern warfare would come to embody. Colonel Jean-Baptiste Estienne, a French officer and one of the early proponents of tank warfare, famously said, "The victory will belong to the one who will manage to bring the most powerful artillery onto the battlefield. And that artillery is the tank." For the men who fought that day, the Battle of Flers and Courcelette marked a turning point. It was the first time they had seen a future dominated not by men alone, but by machines, slow, clumsy, and terrifying machines that would evolve into the decisive weapons of future conflicts. The tank, despite its humble and troubled beginnings, had arrived. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to stay updated with more content. This content has been adapted from the powerful features of Polyspeaks for You, South Africa's leading accessibility software. Learn more at www.polyspeaks4u.co.za. We invite you to support this meaningful dyslexic initiative, crafted and developed by an individual who personally understands the challenges of dyslexia.